Leo thought it was just another forgettable errand in the human world. Nothing seemed unusual about the brightly lit grocery store. Then a little girl in a bright pink sweater suddenly raised her hand in the air. Not to reach for a cereal box, not to wave at someone she knew, but to give a rescue signal. No one around her understood what it meant. Nobody realized she was in danger. Nobody knew the man gripping her hand wasn't her father. She was silently begging for help. Leo didn't notice her at first, his mind occupied with maintaining his carefully constructed human facade. But his alpha senses did. The ancient instincts buried beneath his disguise suddenly flared to life, detecting a tremor of pure terror that cut through the mundane noise of the store like a blade. His body went rigid, every supernatural sense screaming that something was terribly wrong. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath, confusion rippling through his controlled demeanor. Leo tried to dismiss it, to continue walking, but his alpha nature refused to be silenced. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Within seconds, the calm shopping trip would transform into a moment of choice, expose his true identity or walk away from a child in desperate need. What was this little girl trying to say? Why could only an Alpha King sense the danger no human could perceive? Stay with us, because what the little girl signaled and what the Alpha King discovered next would reveal a truth so shocking that it would shatter his carefully hidden existence. The grocery store felt unusually peaceful that afternoon. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above rows of colorful cereal boxes, the clatter of shopping carts blending with murmured conversations, and the occasional squeak of shoes on polished floors. Families wandered through aisles with half-filled baskets, comparing prices, laughing, moving at the slow rhythm of an ordinary day. Nothing about this place hinted that something life-changing was moments away from unfolding. Leo Ederson moved through the cereal aisle with deliberate, measured steps, his dark embroidered coat a subtle contrast to the bright, commercial surroundings. To any casual observer, he appeared to be just another shopper, handsome, perhaps, with his striking features and long dark hair, but unremarkable. Forgettable. Exactly as he intended. But beneath the surface of his human disguise, Leo was anything but ordinary. His amber eyes, carefully dulled to appear human, scanned the aisles with practiced indifference. His posture remained relaxed, hands tucked casually in his coat pockets, every movement designed to blend seamlessly into the mundane rhythm of human life. Years of concealment had perfected this act. No one could see the ancient power coiled within him, the supernatural strength that could shatter steel, or the predatory instincts that constantly mapped every exit, every threat, every heartbeat within 50 feet. "Just pick up what you need and leave," he reminded himself, reaching for a box he didn't actually want. No attention.
No complications.
But Leo's control, as absolute as it appeared, required constant vigilance. His alpha nature didn't rest. It was always there, humming beneath his skin like an engine barely contained, threatening to surge forward at any provocation. The slightest loss of focus could expose him, a flash of gold in his eyes, and in human reaction time, a show of strength that would shatter his carefully constructed illusion. Leo gave a polite nod to an elderly woman who shuffled past him, her cart squeaking softly. She smiled, oblivious to the dangerous creature standing beside her. He returned the gesture with practiced ease, then moved forward, every step deliberate, every breath measured. "Looks like an easy day," he murmured to himself. But even as the words left his lips, something shifted. It was subtle, so subtle that most beings, human or otherwise, wouldn't have noticed a difference at all. But Leo, whose senses were honed by centuries of survival, felt a quiet disturbance ripple through his awareness. Not a threat to him, not danger in the traditional sense, but something else. Something that triggered the ancient, unbreakable code buried deep in his alpha blood. Leo paused mid-reach, his hand hovering over a cereal box. His nostrils flared slightly as he drew in a slow, controlled breath. The air carried dozens of scents: cleaning chemicals, sugary cereals, fabric softener from passing shoppers, coffee from the store's cafe. But underneath it all, almost imperceptible, was something sharp and acrid.
Fear.
Pure, chemical fear. His jaw tightened. He tried to dismiss it, to continue his errand, and ignore the pull of his instincts. This wasn't his world. These weren't his people. His mission here was simple: remain undetected, complete his task, and return to his kingdom without incident. Interfering in human affairs risked everything: his cover, his safety, potentially the safety of his entire realm. Not your concern, he told himself firmly. Keep moving. But his alpha senses had never been wrong. They couldn't be ignored, couldn't be silenced by logic or caution. They were a fundamental part of what he was, a connection to truth that transcended conscious thought. Leo's eyes narrowed as he turned his head slowly, scanning the aisle with renewed focus. His gaze moved methodically over shoppers, over displays, over movement and stillness alike, searching for the source of the disturbance. And then he saw them. Near the end of the cereal aisle, a man and a little girl walked side by side. But something about the pair didn't quite fit. The man had a strong, imposing build, his forearms covered in dark tattoos that snaked up past his rolled sleeves. His grip was wrapped firmly, too firmly, around the child's small hand. He moved with forced casualness, the kind of confidence that came from wanting to appear relaxed while being anything but. His eyes darted left and right, scanning the aisle, checking faces, measuring who was watching and who wasn't. Most shoppers didn't pay attention. To them, he looked like any other guardian shopping with a child. Perhaps a bit rough around the edges, but unremarkable. But the girl, she didn't match the scene around her. She wore a bright pink sweater that should have made her stand out, should have drawn smiles from passing grandmothers and curious glances from other children. Yet somehow she seemed to fade into the background, as though she was trying desperately to disappear. Her brown hair hung neatly over her shoulders, clean and brushed, but her posture told a different story.
Stiff. Tight.
But even as he fought for control, his eyes tracked the pair with unwavering focus. The ancient Alpha Code, the one rule that superseded all others, echoed through his mind with the force of an absolute command: protect the pack's weakest. Defend those who cannot defend themselves. When the man paused to pretend he was examining a cereal label, the girl glanced around quickly. Her eyes didn't wander with a child's curiosity. They searched with desperate, quiet panic. She scanned the faces of nearby shoppers as though silently pleading for someone, anyone, to notice her, to understand that something wasn't right. But nobody did. A mother pushing a cart rolled past her, without a second glance. A teenage boy compared protein bars and walked on. An elderly couple shuffled by, too absorbed in their own conversation to notice the stiffness in the little girl's shoulders, the terror barely contained behind her wide, frightened eyes. For a brief moment, her gaze swept across the aisle and landed directly on Leo. Time seemed to fracture. Leo felt the impact of that look like a physical blow. Those eyes, so young, so terrified, so utterly desperate, locked onto his with an intensity that pierced straight through every layer of his disguise, every wall he'd built between himself and the human world. She saw him, not as a stranger, not as just another shopper. She saw him as something more, something different, something that might be able to help when no one else could. The girl's expression shifted in that frozen instant. Fear mixed with the faintest, most fragile spark of hope. It lasted for just a heartbeat before she quickly looked away, her survival instincts screaming at her not to draw attention, not to make the man suspicious. But Leo had seen it, had felt it, the silent, desperate plea that transcended words. The man tugged on her hand, and she followed without protest, but her eyes kept flicking back toward Leo every few steps, each glance a renewed cry for help that only he could hear. Leo stood motionless, his entire being torn between two impossible choices. Walk away and preserve the secret that kept his kingdom safe, or intervene and risk exposing the truth that an alpha king walked among humans. His breathing shifted, deepening into the controlled rhythm of a predator preparing to strike. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, colder, though no human could consciously feel the change. It was the subtle distortion that always preceded an alpha's emergence, the moment when centuries of concealed power began to leak through the cracks of mortal disguise. A nearby shopper shivered without knowing why and moved to a different aisle. Another felt an inexplicable urge to leave the store early. The humans couldn't name what they sensed, but their instincts recognized the presence of an apex predator in their midst. Leo's eyes darkened slightly, the amber hue threatening to blaze into the inhuman gold that betrayed his true nature. His jaw set with grim determination. "Damn it," he breathed. The choice had already been made. It had been made the instant that little girl had looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes. The instant his alpha senses had confirmed what she was too afraid to scream. She was in mortal danger, and he was the only one who could save her. The calm of the grocery store was about to shatter. The mundane world of humans was about to collide with the hidden world of alphas. And Leo Ederson, the alpha king in disguise, was done hiding. Leo's change in demeanor was subtle at first. So subtle an untrained eye would have missed it entirely. His relaxed posture tightened by degrees. His casual grip on the cereal box became a controlled, deliberate placement back on the shelf. His breathing, once slow and measured to mimic human rhythms, shifted into the focused, predatory cadence of an alpha locking onto prey. The little girl and the tattooed man were moving away now, heading toward the end of the aisle where they would disappear around the corner and potentially out of the store entirely. Every second mattered. Leo took a single step forward, and the movement was different from every step he'd taken before. Gone was the careful, mundane shuffle of a human shopper. This was the fluid, purposeful stride of a hunter. His coat swayed slightly with the motion, the dark embroidered patterns catching the fluorescent light in a way that made them seem almost alive. His enhanced senses opened fully, no longer restrained by the need to appear human. He could hear the rapid staccato of the girl's heartbeat, frantic and bird-like, a tempo driven by pure terror. He could smell the sharp, metallic edge of her adrenaline, the way her small body was flooded with chemicals screaming at her to run, to fight, to do anything to escape. And the man, his heartbeat was elevated too, but in a different way. Calculated. Controlled. The rhythm of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and was confident he could get away with it. Wrong. Leo thought with cold certainty. You're very, very wrong. The girl's hand suddenly moved. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable amid the bustle of the store. She raised her free hand slowly, fingers spread in a deliberate pattern, thumb tucked, for fingers extended. The universal rescue signal, the desperate code created for moments exactly like this. She held it there for just 3 seconds, her eyes darting around one final time, searching for anyone who might understand. Leo's entire body went rigid. His alpha vision sharpened to supernatural clarity, eliminating every distraction, every irrelevant detail. The world narrowed to a single, crystalline focus. That small, trembling hand held high in desperate plea. The signal. She was begging for help in the only way she could. And she had no idea that the man watching her wasn't just any stranger. He was a king, an alpha, a creature of immense power whose very nature compelled him to answer that plea. Something inside Leo shattered. Not his control, not his composure, but the final barrier between his human disguise and his true self. The ancient alpha instinct, The unbreakable code, written into his very soul, surged forward with overwhelming force. His eyes flashed, just for an instant, blazing from amber to molten gold, the telltale sign of an alpha's power emerging. The temperature around him seemed to drop several degrees. The air grew dense, heavy with invisible pressure that made nearby humans instinctively step back without understanding why. Leo's lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that seemed just a fraction too sharp, too predatory to be entirely human. The leash he'd kept on his power for hours, days, weeks of careful concealment snapped. "No more hiding," he whispered, his voice carrying an undertone of command that resonated with supernatural authority. "Not for this." He moved. Not with human speed. Not with human caution. Leo Ederson, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, moved with the lethal precision and inhuman velocity that had made his kind the apex predators of both the supernatural and mortal worlds. The grocery store's peaceful afternoon was about to end, and the tattooed man holding a terrified little girl's hand was about to learn that monsters were real, and one of them had just noticed him. The sensory assault hit Leo with the force of a physical blow. His alpha nature, now unleashed from its careful restraints, flooded his consciousness with information no human could possibly process. The grocery store transformed from a simple commercial space into a complex tapestry of scents, sounds, and invisible chemical signatures that told stories words never could. The tattooed man's scent reached Leo first, a layered, contradictory mixture that reeked of deception. Beneath the cheap cologne and cigarette smoke, Leo detected the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. But it wasn't the adrenaline of fear. It was the elevated heart rate of someone executing a plan, someone riding the high of getting away with something terrible. False bravado leaked from the man's pores like toxic perfume, the kind of artificial confidence that masked deep-seated anxiety. He was nervous, yes, but not afraid. He believed he was in control.
Wrong.
But it was the girl's scent that tore through Leo's composure like a knife. Pure, undiluted terror poured off her small frame in waves. Her fear had a chemical signature Leo had encountered too many times in his long life. The sharp, acrid stench of a child in mortal danger. It was different from adult fear, more primal, more desperate. Her body was flooded with stress hormones, her small heart hammering so hard Leo could hear individual valve closures from 20 feet away. She was a trapped animal, frozen in the grip of a predator, every survival instinct screaming at her to run while knowing she couldn't. The contrast between the two scents, calculated deception and innocent terror, confirmed everything Leo's instincts had been screaming. This wasn't a father and daughter. This was a predator and prey. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. The supernatural strength he'd kept locked down for weeks threatened to surge forward, to tear through this public space and rip the man away from the child with the kind of violence that would leave no doubt what Leo truly was.
No.
He forced his breathing to slow, forced his body to remain still even as every alpha instinct demanded immediate action.
Think.
You're in the middle of a human public space. Cameras everywhere. Witnesses everywhere. If you move like an alpha, if you show what you are, everything falls apart. The consequences cascaded through his mind with brutal clarity. Exposure wouldn't just risk him, it would risk his entire kingdom. Word would spread. Videos would go viral. Questions would be asked. Investigations would begin. And his enemies, the ones who'd been hunting for any sign of his presence in the human world, would finally have their proof. Walk away, the logical part of his mind insisted. She's human. Not your responsibility. Not your world. You have a kingdom to protect, treaties to maintain, a war barely kept at bay by your careful anonymity. One child isn't worth the risk of thousands of your own people. But even as the thoughts formed, Leo knew they were hollow. The Alpha Code wasn't a suggestion or a guideline. It was an absolute law written into the very fabric of what he was. The strong protect the weak. The powerful defend the helpless. To walk away from a child in mortal danger would be to betray everything that made him a king rather than just a monster with power. His internal war lasted perhaps 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which the man and girl took several more steps toward the end of the aisle. 3 seconds in which the window to act was rapidly closing. Then the girl turned her head. Her eyes, wide and glistening with unshed tears, swept across the aisle one more time. And when they landed on Leo, when she saw him watching her with an intensity that no casual observer would ever possess, something shifted in her expression. Recognition. Not of who he was, but of what he might be. A lifeline. Her small hand, the one not imprisoned in the man's grip, slowly rose. Thumb tucked against her palm. 4 fingers extended. The signal. She held it there, her entire arm trembling with the effort, with the fear, with the desperate, fragile hope that someone, anyone, would understand. She wasn't looking at him as a man. She was looking at him as her last hope, the final chance before she disappeared forever into whatever nightmare awaited her beyond those store doors. Their eyes locked across the distance. In that moment, Leo saw everything. Her terror, her courage, her absolute certainty that if he didn't help her, no one would. The decision crystallized with perfect, irrevocable clarity. His eyes flashed gold, no longer bothering to hide it. The air around him grew cold enough that a nearby shopper gasped and pulled her jacket tighter. Leo's lips pulled back in something that was no longer quite human, a predator's snarl barely contained behind a veneer of civilization. The Alpha King had made his choice. And heaven help anyone who stood in his way. The ancient words whispered through Leo's consciousness, like an incantation older than civilization itself. The Alpha Code. Not written in any book, not taught in any lesson, but burned into the very essence of every true alpha from the moment of their first transformation. It was the law that separated kings from tyrants, protectors from predators, leaders from monsters. The strong defend the weak. The powerful shield the helpless. The pack protects its own, and all children are the pack's own. Leo had lived by these words for centuries, had built his kingdom on them, had fought wars to uphold them. And now, standing in a mundane grocery store in the human world, wearing a disguise meant to hide everything he was, the code demanded its due. There was no more room for debate, no more weighing of consequences, no more calculating risks versus rewards. A child had asked for his help, and the Alpha Code left only one response. Yes. Always yes. Something fundamental shifted inside Leo. Not a loss of control, but a surrender to inevitability. The careful walls he'd built around his power didn't crumble. They simply ceased to matter. His human disguise, maintained with such meticulous care, became irrelevant. Let them see. Let them film. Let them question. None of it mattered more than the terrified child holding up a silent plea. The change rippled through him like a wave of ice and electricity. Leo's amber eyes darkened to a deep, threatening gold, the color of molten metal or a predator's gaze caught in headlights. His pupils contracted to vertical slits for just a fraction of a second before returning to their circular shape, but the impression of something profoundly inhuman remained. Anyone looking directly at him would feel it, the crawling certainty that they were no longer looking at a man, but at something wearing a man's shape. His casual posture, the relaxed stance of a bored shopper, evaporated. His spine straightened with regal authority. His shoulders rolled back, broadening his frame in a way that seemed to make him physically larger without actually changing size. Every muscle in his body coiled with predatory readiness, visible even beneath his dark embroidered coat. His hands, previously tucked in his pockets, now hung at his sides with fingers slightly curved, not quite claws, but ready to become them. The air itself responded to his transformation. A wave of cold radiated outward from Leo, like an invisible pulse. It wasn't natural cold, wasn't the chill of air conditioning or winter breeze. It was the supernatural cold that accompanied apex predators, the temperature drop that preceded an alpha's emergence into full power. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered briefly as if disrupted by an electromagnetic field. Nearby shoppers reacted instantly, though none of them understood why. A woman pushing a cart suddenly shivered violently, goosebumps racing up her arms. She looked around in confusion, pulling her cardigan tighter and muttering about the store's aggressive air conditioning. A teenage boy scrolling through his phone glanced up sharply, his survival instinct screaming at him that something dangerous was nearby. He couldn't identify what, couldn't see any threat, but his hand trembled as he quickly moved to a different aisle. An elderly man paused mid-reach for a box of oatmeal, his breath misting slightly in the suddenly frigid air. He frowned, rubbed his arms, and decided perhaps he didn't need breakfast cereal after all. The humans scattered like prey animals sensing a predator they couldn't see. Within seconds, the aisle was emptying, shoppers unconsciously fleeing from the oppressive, threatening presence that Leo could no longer fully contain. Good. Fewer witnesses. Fewer complications. Leo took one deliberate step forward, then another. His movement was nothing like the casual shuffle of a shopper. This was the measured, purposeful stride of a hunter closing distance on prey. Each footfall was perfectly balanced, perfectly controlled, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. His coat swayed with emotion, the dark patterns seeming to writhe in the flickering light. The tattooed man, still gripping Olivia's hand, had his back to Leo. But some primal instinct, some ancient warning system buried deep in human DNA, made him tense. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. His shoulders hunched slightly as though anticipating a blow. Leo's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like the baring of teeth. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured, but carrying an undertone that vibrated through the air with supernatural authority. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The alpha command woven through his words bypassed conscious thought and struck directly at the hindbrain, at the part of human consciousness that still remembered what it meant to be prey. Stop. Walking. 2 words. Simple. Undeniable. The tattooed man froze mid-step, as though he'd been struck. His entire body went rigid, locked in place by an instinct older than language itself. Every cell in his body screamed at him to obey, to submit, to do whatever this voice commanded, because something inside him recognized that disobedience meant death. He tried to fight it, tried to force his legs to keep moving, but his muscles refused. His breath came in short, rapid gasps. Sweat broke out across his forehead despite the sudden cold. Slowly, with visible effort, the man turned his head to see who had spoken, and found himself staring into the gold-flecked eyes of something that definitely wasn't human. The tattooed man's face cycled through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, irritation, dawning unease. But years of practiced deception kicked in, overriding his body's primal warnings. He'd talked his way out of situations before. He'd fooled police, security guards, suspicious neighbors. This was just another mark, another obstacle to navigate with the right combination of charm and aggression. His lips pulled back in what was meant to be a disarming smile, but it came out wrong. Too tight. Too forced. The edges trembled with barely contained nervousness. "Hey, man," he said, his voice pitched artificially casual, with an underlying edge of aggression meant to establish dominance. "We got a problem here?" His grip on Olivia's hand tightened perceptibly, a subtle warning squeeze that made the girl flinch. The message was clear: stay quiet. Play along. Or else. "Just shopping with my daughter," he continued, the life flowing smoothly off his tongue. He'd used variations of this script dozens of times. "She's been acting up all day, haven't you, sweetie?" He glanced down at Olivia with a look that was meant to appear paternal, but carried an unmistakable threat. Leo didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, utterly still, his predatory gaze fixed on the man with an intensity that would have made stone crack. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, filling the space between them with invisible pressure. The tattooed man's smile began to falter. Something was deeply wrong. This stranger hadn't looked away, hadn't blinked, hadn't shown even the slightest indication of buying the story. Worse, his eyes. There was something profoundly disturbing about those eyes. "Look, I don't know what you think you saw," the man started again, trying to inject more authority into his voice. Leo took one step closer. Then he let the mask drop. For just a heartbeat, for a fraction of a second that felt like an eternity, Leo allowed his true nature to blaze through. His eyes erupted into brilliant, luminous gold, not the warm amber of human hazel eyes, but the supernatural, burning gold of an apex predator. They glowed with inner light, reflecting nothing, generating their own radiance, like twin suns blazing in a human face. His pupils contracted to thin vertical slits, utterly inhuman, utterly terrifying. But it wasn't just his eyes. In that moment, the air around Leo seemed to warp and shimmer. His shadow on the floor stretched and darkened, becoming too large, too deep, shaped wrong. The temperature plummeted another 10 degrees. Every hair on the tattooed man's body stood on end as static electricity crackled invisibly through the air. And for that single, crystalline instant, the man saw exactly what was standing before him. Not a human. Not even close. Something ancient, something powerful, something that occupied the same evolutionary space above humans that humans occupied above insects. A predator. A king. A monster. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The tattooed man's forced smile shattered. His face went pale, then gray, then nearly translucent as every drop of blood drained from his features. His pupils dilated to black pools. His mouth opened in a soundless gasp, lips trembling, jaw working but producing no words. His entire body began to shake, not just his hands, but violent, full-body tremors of pure, instinctive terror. He'd been afraid before in his life. Afraid of getting caught, afraid of going to prison, afraid of bigger, meaner criminals. But this was different. This was the fear that lived in human DNA, coded into the species over millions of years of being hunted by things with bigger teeth and faster reflexes. This was the fear that turned legs to water and made bladders release and stripped away every pretense of civilization. The man stumbled backward, his grip on Olivia's hand loosening involuntarily. Then a small voice cut through the suffocating tension. "He's not my dad." Olivia's whisper was barely audible, but in the oppressive silence of the aisle, it rang out like a bell. Her eyes remained fixed on Leo, not with fear, but with something else entirely. Recognition.
Trust. Hope.
She'd seen the flash of gold in his eyes, had felt the supernatural cold, had witnessed the same terrifying display that had broken the tattooed man's composure. But where the abductor saw a monster, Olivia saw a savior. "He's not my dad," she repeated, slightly louder now, her voice gaining strength from Leo's powerful presence. "He took me from the park." "Please," her voice cracked, but she didn't look away from Leo. "Please help me." The tattooed man's last shred of composure evaporated. His breathing came in rapid, panicked gasps. His eyes darted toward the end of the aisle, calculating escape routes, weighing his chances. Leo's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp. "Run," Leo said softly, his voice carrying that same supernatural command, "and I promise you won't make it 3 steps." The man believed him. Absolutely.
Completely.
without question. But belief and compliance were two different things. Fear had a way of short-circuiting rational thought, of triggering the most primitive survival responses buried in the human brain. And right now, every instinct the tattooed man possessed was screaming the same desperate message: flee. His decision crystallized in a fraction of a second. The calculation was simple, brutal, animalistic. He couldn't fight whatever this thing was. He couldn't talk his way out. His only chance, his only hope, was to run, to get to his vehicle, to disappear into the city before this nightmare could catch him. The man's body coiled like a compressed spring. His weight shifted to the balls of his feet. His free hand balled into a fist. And then, with a desperate snarl of panic, he moved. He yanked Olivia's arm with vicious force, trying to use her small body as a shield, as an obstacle, as anything that might buy him an extra second. The girl cried out in pain as her shoulder wrenched, her feet stumbling as she was dragged forward. The tattooed man spun toward the end of the aisle, legs pumping, adrenaline flooding his system with enough chemical fuel to make him faster than he'd ever moved in his life. 1 step. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor. 2 steps. The end of the aisle was just ahead, freedom beyond it. 3. Leo moved. There was no warning. No tensing of muscles, no preparatory crouch, no visible gathering of momentum. One instant he was standing 20 feet away, and the next instant he simply wasn't. The space between them collapsed without transition, without the normal passage of time and distance that governed human movement. To anyone watching, and there were precious few left in the rapidly emptying aisle, it would have appeared as nothing more than a blur. A distortion in the air, a smear of dark fabric and pale skin, like a photograph taken with too slow a shutter speed. Leo didn't run, didn't sprint. He displaced, moving through space with the impossible velocity of a creature built for hunting prey that evolution never prepared humans to escape. Before the tattooed man's third step hit the ground, Leo was there. The man's brain hadn't even processed the movement. 1 millisecond, the terrifying stranger was behind him. The next, he felt a presence beside him, impossibly close, radiating cold and power like a furnace radiating heat. Leo's hand shot out with surgical precision. No wild punch, no clumsy grapple. His fingers found the cluster of nerves at the base of the man's neck, a pressure point humans barely understood, but that alphas had mapped centuries ago. He applied force with perfect calibration, enough to override nerve signals, not enough to cause permanent damage. The effect was instantaneous. Every muscle in the tattooed man's body seized simultaneously. His legs locked mid-stride. His lungs froze mid-breath. His grip on Olivia's arm went completely slack as his nervous system simply stopped accepting commands from his brain. For a horrible, disorienting moment, he was a prisoner in his own body, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything except feel the overwhelming, supernatural pressure radiating from the hand on his neck. Then Leo's other hand moved to the man's chest. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't even really a push. It was a controlled application of force, supernatural strength channeled through precise biomechanics that sent the man's body flying backward as if struck by a speeding car. The tattooed man's feet left the ground. His body twisted through the air in an ungainly arc, arms windmilling uselessly, mouth open in a silent scream his paralyzed lungs couldn't voice. He crashed into a display of cereal boxes with devastating force, cardboard exploding outward in a shower of bright colors and processed grain. The boxes rained down around him as he hit the floor hard, sprawling face down on polished linoleum. The impact drove what little air remained in his lungs out in a single, wheezing gasp. Stars burst across his vision. The world spun sickeningly, refusing to stabilize. He tried to push himself up, tried to crawl, tried to do anything, but his body refused to cooperate. His arms trembled uselessly beneath him. His legs wouldn't respond. The nerve strike had left him disoriented and weak, like a newborn trying to walk for the first time. Olivia stumbled free, her released hand clutching her sore shoulder. She looked down at the man who'd taken her, who'd terrified her, who'd been dragging her toward whatever nightmare he'd planned. He looked pathetic now, sprawled among scattered cereal boxes, groaning weakly, utterly defeated. She turned to look at Leo. The man in the dark embroidered coat stood perfectly still, his breathing barely elevated, as though he'd done nothing more strenuous than pick up a dropped item. His eyes had returned to their amber color, though they still held that predatory intensity. He was looking at her now, his expression softening slightly, the terrifying monster receding behind the mask of humanity once more. "You're safe now," Leo said quietly, his voice no longer carrying that supernatural command, just simple truth. "He can't hurt you anymore." Olivia nodded, unable to speak, tears finally breaking free to stream down her cheeks. Not tears of fear anymore, but of relief, of release, of overwhelming gratitude toward the strange, powerful man who'd appeared when no one else had seen her desperate plea. Behind them, the tattooed man groaned again, trying and failing to rise, his escape attempt ended before it had truly begun. The immediate threat neutralized, Leo's heightened senses cataloged the situation with ruthless efficiency. The aisle was nearly empty now, the few remaining shoppers having fled during the confrontation. But beyond this small bubble of space, the store was still full of people. Phones would be coming out. Cameras would be recording. Security would be responding. And somewhere in the distance, growing closer by the second, Leo could already hear the distinctive wail of sirens. Time was running out. Olivia stood frozen in place, her small body trembling with residual adrenaline and shock. Her eyes, wide, brown, still glistening with tears, were locked on Leo with an expression that was equal parts awe and disbelief. She was looking at him the way one might look at a mythical creature stepped out of legend, something too impossible to be real, yet undeniably standing right before her. And in that moment, Leo realized how he must appear to her. His dark embroidered coat swayed slightly with his controlled breathing. His long hair framed features that were striking even by human standards, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that, even in their returned amber state, held depths no mortal gaze could match. He was impossibly handsome in the way that supernatural beings often were, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure, like a perfectly crafted blade. But it was more than his appearance. It was the way he held himself, the unmistakable aura of power and authority that clung to him like a second skin. Even with his supernatural abilities restrained, even with his eyes no longer glowing gold, there was something undeniably formidable about him. Something that marked him as different, as other, as more. Olivia didn't look afraid. She looked grateful. And that gratitude, that absolute trust shining in her young face, struck Leo harder than any physical blow could have. He had to leave.
Now.
Before that gratitude turned to questions he couldn't answer. Leo felt his power surge one final time, demanding action, demanding he stay and ensure the girl's complete safety. But he ruthlessly clamped down on it, shoving it back behind the walls of control he'd spent centuries perfecting. His eyes, which had been flickering between amber and gold, settled firmly into their human color. The supernatural cold radiating from his body dissipated. The predatory tension in his posture eased, though his alertness remained absolute. The mask was returning. The disguise was sliding back into place. He moved toward Olivia with deliberate care, making his movements slow and non-threatening despite the urgency pounding through his veins. He crouched down to her eye level, bringing his imposing height down to something less overwhelming. This close, he could see the finger-shaped bruises already forming on her arm where the man had gripped her, could smell the lingering chemical signature of her fear slowly giving way to relief. "Are you hurt?" Leo asked quietly, his voice stripped of the supernatural command, now just gentle and concerned. Olivia shook her head, unable to find words. Her lips moved soundlessly before she finally managed a whispered, "Thank you." Leo's expression softened for just a moment, a flash of genuine warmth breaking through his carefully controlled features. "You were very brave," he told her. "That signal you made, that was smart. Very smart." He wanted to say more. Wanted to ensure she understood she'd done everything right, that she'd survived because of her own courage and quick thinking. But the sirens were getting closer, and he could hear the rapid footfalls of security guards converging on their location. "Help is coming," Leo said, straightening from his crouch. "Stay right here. Tell them what happened. Tell them everything." He paused, his amber eyes meeting hers one last time. "You're safe now, Olivia. He can never hurt you again." Her eyes widened slightly at the use of her name. He'd heard the abductor say it, had filed it away with the thousands of other details his alpha senses cataloged. But before she could question how he knew it, Leo was already moving. Not with the supernatural speed he displayed during the confrontation, but with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly how to disappear in a crowd. He slipped around the corner of the aisle, his dark coat blending into the shadows between the towering shelves. His movements were smooth, unhurried, designed to avoid drawing attention from the confused shoppers now beginning to peer cautiously around corners. Behind him, Olivia remained standing beside the groaning, defeated abductor. In front of him, the path to a side exit beckoned. Leo glanced back once, just once, to see a store employee rushing toward Olivia with a phone pressed to her ear. The girl would be safe. She'd be cared for, questioned, reunited with her real family. The police would have their perpetrator gift-wrapped and waiting. His part in this story was over. Leo Ederson, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, melted into the mundane chaos of the grocery store like a ghost fading at dawn. By the time the police arrived 3 minutes later, by the time security footage was reviewed and witness statements were taken, the mysterious man in the dark embroidered coat had vanished completely. No one could agree on exactly what he'd looked like. No one had gotten a clear photograph. No camera had captured his face at the right angle. He'd been there, undeniably real, impossibly powerful. And then he was gone, leaving behind only questions, scattered cereal boxes, and one very grateful little girl who would never forget the handsome stranger with the golden eyes who'd saved her life. The grocery store had transformed from a peaceful shopping center into a scene of controlled chaos. Store employees rushed about with walkie-talkies pressed to their ears, coordinating responses and trying to manage the growing crowd. Shoppers who'd fled during the confrontation were now creeping back, phones out, recording the aftermath, whispering excitedly to one another about what they'd witnessed. A cluster of concerned citizens had gathered around Olivia, their maternal and paternal instincts kicking in at the sight of the frightened child. An older woman had draped her own jacket around the girl's shoulders. A young mother was offering tissues and soft, reassuring words. A store manager knelt beside her, asking gentle questions while waiting for the police to arrive. The tattooed man remained on the floor, surrounded by scattered cereal boxes, his hands now being held by 2 security guards who'd finally arrived on scene. He wasn't fighting anymore, wasn't resisting. The nerve strike had left him disoriented and weak, but more than that, the absolute terror of what he'd faced had broken something fundamental in him. He stared at nothing, his eyes distant and haunted, occasionally mumbling incoherent fragments about eyes and not human and impossible. The witnesses were no help to the investigation. When police arrived and began taking statements, every account was different, contradictory, impossibly vague. He was tall, I think, maybe 6 feet, or shorter. I didn't get a good look. He wore a black coat. Or was it dark blue? It had patterns, I remember patterns. His hair was long.
Dark.
Or maybe it was pulled back. I'm not sure.
He moved so fast.
Like a blur. 1 second he was there, then I don't know. I looked away for just a moment. His eyes were strange. Intense. What color? I couldn't tell you. Brown? Gold? They were just different. The security footage would prove equally unhelpful. Every camera angle that should have captured his face was somehow obscured. A glare from the fluorescent lights, a momentary blur of motion, a perfectly timed obstruction from a passing shopper. It was as though reality itself had conspired to keep his identity hidden. But Olivia remembered everything. When the police officer knelt beside her, notepad in hand, and asked the question everyone wanted answered. Sweetheart, can you tell me who helped you? Who was the man who stopped that bad person? Olivia looked up with eyes that still held traces of awe and wonder. The king, she whispered. The officer blinked, confused. The king? Do you mean like a king from a story? Olivia shook her head slowly, her small hand clutching the worn stuffed toy against her chest.
No.
He was real. He was the king. She paused, struggling to put into words something she didn't fully understand herself. His eyes, they glowed, like gold. And he wasn't scared of anything. He moved like... She trailed off, unable to articulate the supernatural speed, the impossible power, the otherworldly presence that had saved her. He was the king, she repeated with absolute certainty. And he saved me. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, both of them clearly thinking the child was in shock, processing trauma through fantasy. They made notes, asked more questions, but Olivia's answer never changed. The king had saved her, and she would never, ever forget his face. 2 blocks away, standing in the shadow of a loading dock behind a shuttered storefront, Leo Ederson watched the flashing red and blue lights paint the grocery store's windows in alternating colors. He could hear everything, the radio chatter of the responding officers, the excited conversations of witnesses, the soft questions being asked of Olivia, her whispered answer. The king. A ghost of a smile touched Leo's lips, though it was tinged with something bittersweet. She'd seen him, truly seen him. Not just the disguise, not just the human mask, but glimpses of what lay beneath. And instead of seeing a monster, she'd seen a king. Children had always been perceptive that way. He knew the risks he'd taken, knew that somewhere in the supernatural community, whispers would begin. An alpha of immense power had revealed himself, even briefly, in a human space. His enemies would hear. They always did. The fragile anonymity he'd maintained for months, possibly years, had been compromised in service of a single human child. But as Leo stood in the shadows, listening to the sounds of Olivia being comforted and the abductor being read his rights, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel anymore.
Peace.
For just this moment, for this single, fleeting victory, he'd done what was right. He'd protected someone who couldn't protect themselves. He'd used the power he'd been born with, the power he usually had to hide and suppress and carefully conceal, for its truest purpose. Not for conquest, not for dominance, not even for the protection of his kingdom, but for a helpless child who'd raised her hand in desperate plea. The Alpha Code wasn't just about duty or honor or ancient tradition. It was about this. These moments when power served compassion, when strength defended weakness, when the strong chose to be guardians rather than predators. Leo pulled his coat tighter around himself and turned away from the flashing lights. He had to disappear completely now, had to find a new identity, a new routine, a new carefully constructed facade. The price of his intervention would be paid in the coming days and weeks. But as he melted into the darkness of the city, Leo carried with him the memory of a little girl's whispered gratitude, her odd expression, her absolute trust in a stranger who'd appeared when no one else had seen her silent plea. She'd been saved by a handsome stranger in a grocery store aisle. She'd never know his real name, never understand the full truth of what he was or the kingdom he ruled in a world beyond her own. She would only remember this, that when she'd needed help most desperately, when she'd raised her hand in a signal no one else understood, the king had answered. And in that moment, Leo Ederson had been exactly what an alpha king was meant to be, not a ruler defined by power and territory, but a protector defined by the choice to use that power for those who had none. The little girl had given a rescue signal to a man, not knowing he was an alpha king. And what he did next had saved her life. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your support means everything.